everyone, welcome to the Movieception Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to take some time to talk about Dune 2. Now, I know I'm very late in putting this review up. I know it's really, really late that I've been putting this review up, but I've been meaning to put it up for a while, and I just thought, better late than never. But yeah, I do want to talk about Dune 2 just because it's just about what everyone's really talking about at this point. I just thought, at least I should put my review out just so I can at least express my feelings about it for all of you who are probably curious about, how did Fariba feel about Dune 2? What is her, thoughts about it? So here it is. I'm finally given the time to actually talk about it. So let's get right down into it. So let me just say this. I'm going to say this right away. Dune 2 is an absolute masterpiece. It's absolutely brilliant. Denis Villeneuve has once again stuck the landing. He is a cinematic genius. There is a reason why he is one of my favorite directors for a reason. And in a case like Dune 2, he has really exceeded my expectations. Now, in terms of leading up to the movie, I was super excited to, for this movie just to begin with. I mean, again, one part just because there was a director, second part the actual cast. Dune Part 1, I actually thought it was a pretty good addition. And if you know already that was the whole point of Part 1 was that it was supposed to be a setup to Part 2. So that even made me far more excited just to see the sequel. And now that actual sequel has dropped, I have to say, it's absolutely brilliant just to see kind of how Denis Villeneuve has really structured and executed the story. The story that has been known to be one of the most unadaptable novels for a long, long time. And somehow a creative genius like Denis Villeneuve has managed to unlock just the impossible. He's done the impossible. So, but yeah, let's get right down into it. I'll dive a little bit of some spoiler stuff here and there, but yeah, let's get right down into it. I think one of the greatest things of what makes this story so great and the way that it's really executed is the fact that Denis Villeneuve knew how he wanted to present the story. He had a specific way of executing it. He had a whole idea of how he wanted to showcase the story. He knew from the beginning how he wanted to present this character of Paul and his journey and what was going to be in terms of his faith of becoming this eventual Messiah that we knew was kind of being teased back in Part 1. So one of the things I will say is that what makes this story so great is that it's not very one-dimensional. It is very complex, it's very complicated, it is very tragic. I mean, I will say that this is such a beautifully tragic storytelling to what is Paul Atreides' journey in Arrakis and seeing what it's like in this Dune world. The reason why this really works is because of all the details that Denis Villeneuve puts into this movie. So of course, the best thing about it is just really understanding this whole Fremen culture. We get the sense of that right from the beginning. He really just dedicates a lot of time in that first act to kind of give us an idea, to absorb who these, Fremen people are, what are their beliefs, what are their faith, how they think, what are their perspective about things going around them, the contrast between beliefs, the whole idea of religion and faith and how that's impacted the people for those who are believers and non-believers. It's absolutely incredible just to kind of get that perspective. And once you get this idea of who these Fremen people are and how that's affecting Paul and how Paul is trying to integrate into their culture, it's that's when you knew that things are really starting to get a little bit juicy. This is where you get to see, okay, this is what's going to become the triggering point not the triggering point, but how this is going to be the really big details that are going to set up kind of this tragedy that we're going to see by the end of the movie. So I have to say the Fremen people, this fact that we get to see a little bit of the Bene Gesserit and seeing how they're very influential and how they were able to translate their whole idea, their whole goals, and how that's impacted the people like the Fremen. Then we see again and I think the big part about the whole storytelling is that, this isn't just a story about Paul's journey, right? This is a story that is very focused on Paul and Chani. Chani becomes very integral in Part 2. Yeah, we got to see a little bit of her in Part 1. We only saw visions of Chani and then via Zendaya, who was only in the movie for 5 minutes in Part 1. Here, she's very, very effective. she's very impactful, and you can tell that her presence was very necessary to really elevate what would eventually become kind of this profound ending that we get by the end of the movie, because the whole bit between Chani and Paul is what is really this glue of setting off everything that happens all around. Again, getting the idea of knowing the Freeman people, seeing Paul's contemplation about his role and this prophecy, then seeing how Chani's evolved and how she has her own her perspective and what she feels about this prophecy, and how it's affecting her own people, and how she wants to see a much different route to it. I mean, it's like you're seeing all these details, all these complications, and it's just like the whole idea of it all coming together and seeing how this translates by the end of the story is just absolutely incredible. And let alone the fact that, you know, it's not just this way the story's structured and directed and executed, but the performance of the cast is just absolutely spectacular. Like, I have to say, I mean, Zendaya does a really good job of showing Chani, again, her complexities, how she's very different, showing her perspective, how she's really integral to the group, as well as the fact that how her story with Paul becomes the big glue to this whole story. Then we see Rebecca Ferguson. I feel like there hasn't been enough, you know, praise for Rebecca Ferguson from a lot of the reviews I've been reading, but Rebecca Ferguson needs her own sort of phrase, because holy crap, the way that she's playing off Paul's mother, Jessica, Lady Jessica, it's like, wow, like I've never seen Rebecca Ferguson like this ever before, and she is absolutely spectacular in her role as Lady Jessica, especially in this case where she's becoming really sinister, how she's being very cynical about everything around her, and how she's really, really motivated to, you know, spread this message about Paul and this prophecy, and trying to like spread that all around, as well as the fact that when we see her bits with the baby, like it's just like, whoa, okay, wow, Rebecca Ferguson's absolutely spectacular. Austin Butler as Faid Rautha. I mean, he is psychotic. He does a really great job of playing off a very psychotic, very crazy antagonist in this movie. In the moments that we do get to see him, he is really all out. He does not hold back in any of those moments, especially in that one fight scene. I believe it's actually an introduction scene that we see of him. It's just like he does not hold back in showing that crazy side of Faid Rautha. So props to Austin Butler. Not really surprised about that. And then of course we do get to see some great other actors like Florence Pugh as Princess Ireland. Although I would say that I can't really judge too much about her performance, because she's kind of basically only like 5 minutes into this movie. So I'm not going to judge too much about her performance there, but aside from everyone else, they're all spectacular. I will say the standout, without a doubt, is Timothée Chalamet. Oh my god, can I just say that third act, when he really starts to embody the prophet, like once we get to the third act and he starts to become this really dark side of Paul, I just completely lost it. I literally was stunned by the performance, the power, the rawness, just the profoundness of his character and the strength of it, and the gravitas of his performance. I mean, it's just wow. That third act was basically Chalamet's right there. Like, that is him owning it. He, in that third act, was just absolutely just spectacular. Like, I've seen a lot of his work before, and I think he's a very great actor. He's a rising star for a reason, but this one may have just really solidified that he is very much one of the best actors right now in this generation. Like, I mean, that last act was just like, wow, I was just stunned. I was completely stunned that we got to see the depth of this darkness of Paul Atreides in a way that it really reminded me a lot of Anakin Skywalker, which now, having learned a little bit about, you know, the connection between them, it makes a lot more sense. But yeah, it was really screaming Anakin Skywalker when I was watching his performance. I was just like, wow, this is reminding me of Anakin Skywalker, how he really descends into this darkness. And wow, and I think this is where I have to say that this is where we get to see, like, the fact that this is not a very one-dimensional story, because the way that this is executed, the way that we get to see the story of Paul is that he's not a hero. He is not the hero of the story. He's an anti-hero. And we get to see kind of the consequences and the tragedy of his story, especially as, you know, even though he has his contemplations, it's like, it's just really inevitable where his his journey goes. And we see by the end of it all, it's just like, wow, this is how it is. Like, he is not necessarily a hero in a way that, that he's going to save these people, but there's just something darker that will eventually ensue in the future, which of course, like, it's kind of been implied that we might get Dune 3, but yeah, I have to say, like, this is quite an incredible way to really showcase the story of Paul Atreides and his revenge quest and what led to it all, and how his story really progresses, and seeing where his story ends up, becoming by the time we get to the end of the actual movie. Let alone the fact that, again, once we actually aside from the fact that we get the story, aside from the fact we get the characters, but just seeing the world building of Dune, it's just absolutely remarkable. Like, we do get a sense of that in part one. I think part one does a pretty good job in what it does need to do. And again, it is very beautiful in its own way. But this one, Denis Villeneuve did not hold back in showing the beauty and the visuals of this world of Arrakis, this Dune world, seeing kind of the visuals of the sand, the sand and the whole desert planet, the actual life forms that do live in there, whether it be the mouse desert, the desert mouse, or the sandworm. I mean, some of the sandworm stuff is just absolutely incredible. The visuals, the visual effects, the fact that we get to see some other bits and pieces, it's just absolutely remarkable with the details that Denis Villeneuve really goes into just to showcase this world. Even again, like, the language, I have to say, like, that was something that really struck me, because a lot of the way that they're kind of pronouncing some of the things, like Muad'Dib, Lisan al-Gaib, what is it? Muad'Dib, Amadi. I mean, it was just like, it was really giving me the sense that, wow, like, this is giving me the sense of, like, North Africa, Middle Eastern vibes. Like, you can see how there's a lot of the influences in terms of the details and the production and the costumes. Like, I have to say, like, I have to applaud Denis Villeneuve. He really went into the extent of really showcasing this world of Dune, not just in the way of showing just Paul's story, but the overall structure, the overall world of what this world is in Dune, especially for anyone like me who's not really read the actual books, just to see the extent of just the actual environment, the setting. It's just absolutely beautiful. We do get to see some really great action sequences here and there. Like, again, there were some things that really kind of gave me a lot of chills, just seeing the contrast of colors in between. Let me just talk about the fact that Hans Zimmer's score in this movie, like, absolutely gives me a lot of chills. Like, you can get the sense of, like, and I'm talking about the theme that they always play for Chani and Paul. Like, you can get the sense, you can get the illusion of the actual score, and how, it's giving a sense of, wow, this really love and sweet, harmonious score, yet you can get the sense of the tragedy that is trying to foreshadow. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I'm just beyond out of this world. I've seen this movie twice, by the way, and watching it the second time is even better, because you get to see the sense of the details in this movie that you may have missed the first time around. And seeing the second time around, I was like, wow, I missed all these details. And now this movie makes even more, like, I mean, this movie's even more spectacular in the way that I actually thought the first time around. I mean, I'm absolutely blown, just absolutely blown with the way that Denis Villeneuve has really managed to adapt and recreate this story, trying to put it onto a big screen, and doing so in a way that it is just absolutely kind of at its peak in terms of cinema. It's really cinematic. The visuals are just spectacular. The acting is out of this world. The visuals are just beautiful. The score is just chilling. I mean, wow, this is without a doubt one of Denis Villeneuve's greatest masterpieces. Really up there with Arrival, really up there with Blade Runner. Far better than Dune Part 1, without a doubt. And that's not to say that Dune Part 1 is bad or anything like that. Dune Part 1 is, like, it serves its own purpose for a reason. It's supposed to be kind of the setup of this movie, and it pays off. It really, really pays off, because Dune 2 is just, I mean, it's just, wow. Denis Villeneuve, it's just, there's a reason why Denis Villeneuve is one of my favorite directors, and he really knocked it out of the park with this one. I mean, let alone the fact that we get a lot of great memes out of this. I mean, Lisan al-Gaib, and then As Written, and I mean, wow. I mean, this movie has now become its own cultural phenomenon, but even before that, I mean, this movie was just absolutely spectacular. I mean, it's almost like it's nearly perfect. Now, I'm only saying nearly perfect because I will say there are a couple of flaws here and there. It's not the most masterpiece, or in a way that's like flawless in a way. There are maybe a couple areas where I would say like it could have been a little bit better, and I'm not trying to say they're nitpicky, but it does warrant a mention of like, okay, these things could have been a little bit more polished. Like, for one thing, the pacing does kind of die off a little bit in the second act. Like, the actual story slows down a little bit, so it does kind of get a little bit slow there, but it does pick up by the time we get to the third act, so at least that got made up. I will also say that in terms of Fad Rauta, like, as I said, I think Austin Butler does a really great job in his performance as the actual character. My only, I will say the only thing I'm a bit, I would have wished a little bit better, that I wish it could have been a little bit better, is that we could have gotten a little bit more of a much deeper idea of who Fad Rauta is, or at least got a much richer story, or his arc in the story, just because I felt like there could have been a little bit more in terms of showing kind of his sinister side and how he's really impactful in the story. I felt like there were some areas where I was just like, I would have liked a little bit more of that effect of who his character is and his villainy. Although I've heard from some of my friends who've told me that, from those who've actually read the book, that the actual this movie itself actually added a little bit more scenes than the actual book. So if that's the case, that's great. I wish that there could have been maybe another 10-15 minutes, add a little bit more context about Fad Rauta and kind of his pursuits in Arrakis, and maybe even show a much darker side, like showing that sinister side of his character. Like, we do get a sense of that a little bit here and there in the third act, getting an idea of like he's a no nonsense character, which is fine. I wish we could have got a little bit more of that. So that was like, so that could have made at least the final act a little bit even more profound the way that it is, because at least I would say, at least in the terms of the fight between Fad and Paul, like, it was a bit underwhelming, I will say too, like, just because of the fact that, I didn't get that sense of that urgency of how, scary Fad is as a character. So I wish there could have been a little bit more of a substance behind that at least behind the actual villain. But besides that, I think that, besides those two flaws, I would say that it could have been a little bit better. I'm not going to address too much about Princess Ireland's like small role, just because it does sound as though they're going to they're going to make her a bit more of a bigger character in Dune 3, which is totally fine by me. But yeah, I wish that but aside from just everything I've said so far, I think this is by far one of Denis Villeneuve's greatest movies out there. Without a doubt, it's one of the best Dune adaptations out there from what I've been hearing. I've not actually watched 1984, but the 1984 version from David Lynch, which I'll probably give a chance at some point. But I mean, this is just absolutely incredible. For someone like me who's not watched any of the previous Dune adaptations before, have not actually read the books, although I'm pretty familiar with some of the plot lines and some of the things that do happen. I knew a little bit about Alia long before, but not too much about her character itself. But beyond that, I have to say, for someone like me who's never really been too aware, or at least has, read the books, I mean, this is absolutely incredible. This is definitely, like, it's like only March and this is already one of my favorite movies of this year. This is by far the best movie so far this year. Can there be any movie that can somehow even be better than this? I have no idea. We'll see. But this definitely does rank as one of my favorite Denis Villeneuve movies out there for a reason. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. It's absolutely tragic. I mean, I can't even say this any better. This is such a beautifully tragic story of Paul Atreides. He is not the hero. He is the anti-hero. We get the sense of that. We see the foreshadows of his descent into darkness, and we see that play out by the end of this movie. And it's just absolutely ridiculous how somehow Denis Villeneuve just managed to really put all this together to give us such a beautiful movie like this. I mean, and let alone making it very cinematic. I mean, it's just wow. Like, that's all I can say. It's just wow. If I were to give a rating of some sort, I would probably give like a 4.75 out of 5. It's just nearly perfect. Yeah, this has a really great chance of being already an Oscar winner going into next year. Because I mean, it's funny because the movie came out just around the time that Oscars are coming, and it's already now we're talking about the Oscars next year. But honestly, this is probably one of the best films I've seen, not just from Denis Villeneuve, but from this year's as well. And I think everyone did such a great job at it. There's just, again, it's just about a masterpiece as it is. So I'm glad I got to talk about it right here. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Dune Part 2 right there. Again, I cannot, hold back on my profound phrase for this movie is just absolutely brilliant. But now that I've actually given you my perspective on it, let me know your thoughts having now seen Dune Part 2. What are your thoughts about it? How do you want to rank it? If you are someone who has actually read the books or actually even seen some of the other adaptations, how do you think this compares to those other source materials and other adaptations? Do you think this is far better? Are you kind of the minority who doesn't really love this movie? If so, like, what do you think didn't really work in this film? Is it because of the pacing? Is it because of some certain aspects of the source material, especially for those who have actually read the book? What do you think about the actual direction, the performances, the ending of it all, some of the changes if you actually read the books, as well as the fact that do you think this is a movie that already has a really good chance of becoming quite a very strong Oscar contender going into the next award season? Let me know your thoughts below and make sure to like and subscribe.